Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start the recording. Awesome. Thank you everyone so much for joining us for the webinar Risk Management During Trail Construction. My name is Candace Gallagher and I am the Director of Operations and Webinar Coordinator for American Trails. And this is our 222nd webinar in the American Trails Advancing Trails webinar series. And it is the third of 4 webinars in a series that we are hosting this fall and winter in partnership with the Professional TrailBuilders Association. And just a reminder, we have a lot of new people joining us. This webinar is being recorded. It includes real-time closed captioning in English and also offers free learning credits. And the links for the learning credit quiz and the survey will be in the chat box, and you can also turn on captions by clicking the caption button at the bottom of your Zoom window. And attendees will receive a follow-up email from me within 2 days that will include a link to the recording, the transcript, the resources slide with the presenter email, as well as useful links that they shared and learning credit details. And I would like to thank our webinar partners today. Along with PTBA, I'd also like to thank Visit Long Beach Peninsula, as well as our federal partners, including the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, and the USDA Forest Service. And before I pass controls over to Kevin and introduce him, our presenter, I do want to recognize PTBA and thank them and their members for working with us to present these important webinar topics to the trails industry. And as you'll see, PTBA, it's a trade association for the trails industry. They represent the private sector companies who specialize in trail design, planning, and construction. And all members are vetted through portfolio submission and peer review before they are allowed to join the membership. And then which right now they have 126 companies worldwide, most of which are in North America, as you can see via the map. So I'm happy to now introduce our presenter for today. We have Kevin Joel, who is the owner of Sierra Trailworks. So I'm excited to pass controls over to Kevin to get started.
Thank you, Candace. I will go ahead and share the screen here. All right, can you see that okay?
Yes, looks good.
Excellent. So welcome everyone. So we're going to talk about managing risk in trail construction activities. And I kind of think as risk management of, somebody sitting in an office writing policies and, trying to think about like, oh, hey, we've got to keep people from getting hurt. And managing risk is more of like, hey, these are the actual actions that you need to do or should do out in the field to reduce potential impacts to you, your people, and your pocketbook. So, a little bit about me. Whoops, that's not advancing. There we go. So, my name is Kevin Joel. I've been involved in trail building for it'll be 30 years in March since I first came out to my first volunteer day when I was in high school. I became a professional contractor in 2016, formed Sierra Trailworks, and we've built somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 miles of trails. And I kind of do this on the side because I have a real job in the fire service, 24 years as a volunteer firefighter, fire inspector, operator, and currently a captain with the Reno Fire Department. I also spent about 5 years in industry working as a journeyman machinist. So I have a pretty good background of like seeing how things go wrong. And that's really kind of all we get in the fire service is we learn how to do a risk assessment very quickly. And we kind of, every time we see somebody get into a predicament, we're like, wow, that's unique. We store that in our little mental toolbox, and it helps us make those decisions quickly of, oh, how can that go wrong? I saw this a few years ago, and that's what happened. And so we learn to make those decisions very quickly in that risk management process. So, a little disclaimer here. I'm not a lawyer, no intention of providing any legal advice today. I'm also not an insurance agent. and I cannot explain accurately what will or won't be covered by your policy. So I would suggest that you talk to your insurance agent if you have any questions about that. And remember, good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. So if we learn from our mistakes and we don't repeat them, we will end up lowering our potential risk. So the things that we're going to talk about today are things that can hurt you, things that can kill you, or things that can cost you money. And these impacts, either physical or monetary, to you, your crew, your company, your organization, your agency, if you are a land manager or a supervisor of a parks trail crew, trail users that may be out using the trail in the area where you are working, and potentially adjacent residents or property owners to your work site. So anyone can sue anyone for anything at any time. The question is will that lawsuit stand up in court? And oftentimes a lawyer may not take a lawsuit because he's like, hey, this isn't, going to go. But we've had some crazy lawsuits that have been related to some land use, and they happen to be filed because the person is a lawyer, so that the cost is not really there for them, and they can kind of throw out some frivolous lawsuits and just see if it sticks and kind of waste everyone's time. But you really need four components. So there's a standard or a duty of like, what would a reasonable person do in the same situation? There has to be a breach of that duty. There has to be an injury to the plaintiff, and there has to be damages. So there has to be like a loss of use or loss of income, to that plaintiff from that injury. So for something to really be able to go forward, it has to have all four of those. But just remember, they can still waste your time without having all those in place. So some of the subjects that we're going to talk about today in this presentation is some of the safety protocols that are out there, some references for doing a tailgate safety talk at the start of a trail day, some recommendations for personal protective equipment, including respiratory protection, uh, first aid, very briefly, tool safety, hazard trees, fire safety, notification of trail users, reducing risk to those users, theft, vandalism, site security, and operating vehicles and equipment. And lastly, very briefly touch on environmental protection. So we'll start with trail work safety protocols. So some agencies and entities may have created their own. If you haven't, which is probably most of you, my recommendation is to utilize the U.S. Forest Service job hazard analysis. So they have done an excellent job of creating these, we call them JHAs, for just about every activity that happens on the forest. So there's one for riding a mountain bicycle. There's one for trail work. There's one for operating a chainsaw. I'll note that, we haven't shared the link yet, but I know on the last slide, and I believe it'll be in the chat, I've created a resource folder that has just about all the documents that I reference in this presentation on a drive. And that is accessible to any of you that has the link. And I know the link's on the last slide and it may pop up in the chat here, but I've included some of the JHAs from our local forest unit, and you can check with your local forest unit, or you're welcome to use these and change the location on them if you wish. But basically these list the tasks involved and then what potential hazards are there, and then what kind of abatement actions, engineering controls, administrative actions can be put into place to reduce the risk from those hazards. So they're a little dry, but there's some very good information in there, and it gives you a kind of a written guideline of, if somebody does get hurt and questions start being asked, you can say like, well, this is what we referenced in our safety briefing to reduce risks and make sure everyone was aware of the hazards. So doing a tailgate safety talk. So the document that I've included up on the screen and also in the drive is one that I've put together where in our agreement with the Forest Service, we are required to go over the JHAs with all of our volunteers that may be attending at the start of every workday. And that's a pretty long discussion. So, I've noticed that you kind of start to lose people after about 10 minutes. So I kind of created this checklist to run down where I skip the stuff that it doesn't apply and I cover the stuff that's going to be applicable for that day. And we can usually get it done in about 10 minutes. And it covers all the information that's in the JHA as far as specific hazards for our area. You may have some different that you would want to include. You're welcome to use that Word document and edit it as you see fit that I've included in the drive. So that's one of your little presents for attending today. So we got to remember that like what I do with my employees on a daily basis, they're used to being out on the trail. They kind of know what to do. It may not be anything other than like what the weather's going to be today if we have any thunderstorms or fire weather, any kind of a wind event, something like that, and then we get to work. But for like a volunteer day where you may have people coming out that this is their first opportunity to do trail work, they may not even be very good at operating a shovel. So this is the chance to kind of run down the potential hazards and how we're going to operate so that they don't get hurt and they don't hurt anyone else. So what kind of personal protective equipment, commonly referred to as PPE? So under our agreement with the Forest Service, it lists what should be worn by volunteers. I've noticed that different forest ranger units and districts seem to have different requirements. So yours may not require this. I know in our area, our local government doesn't necessarily require it. It gets difficult, like, oh, well, on this trail day, I could wear short sleeves. So we kind of just, within our organizations, we kind of just say, hey, we're just going to follow the Forest Service recommendations at all times to make it easier on everyone. Uh, but long sleeves, long pants, sturdy shoes, so no Crocs or sandals or flip-flops, gloves, work gloves, a hard hat or a bike helmet, and eye protection. So that's really the minimal PPE for doing trail work that's within our agreement, and then basically my recommendation because it reduces the likelihood of an injury occurring. When you maybe just do a minor slip and fall, you pick up a thorny or reach into a thorny bush to do some pruning, and we've had this happen. Random uh, objects falling or other head contact. The hard hat can make something be a non-incident that otherwise might be a trip to the ER. Additional PPE, depending on the activities. So when you're operating power tools or doing any other noisy activities, ear protection is required. Off the top of my head, I think it's 90 decibel. I shouldn't say this because I don't remember exactly, but there's a certain decibel limit where OSHA says, hey, you have to start having ear protection involved. It's in the neighborhood of, I believe, at 90, 88 or 90. Um, if you're running chainsaws, wear approved chaps. The chaps that you find at the average hardware store often aren't approved by the Forest Service for like commercial use. So get good chaps. There is a significant difference. If you're doing rock work or armoring, knee pads can really make the difference in how how long you can do that, both within a day and within a lifetime. If you're doing any kind of rock drilling, splitting, grinding, chipping, anything that's creating rock dust, N95 respiratory protection is highly recommended. And I'll hit a little bit more on that on the next slide. If you're dealing with like wood preservatives like sealer or stain or like pressure treated type wood, wearing chemical protective gloves to avoid skin contact on that is very helpful. A little bit more on respiratory protection. This was a project we had while the Tamarack fire was burning south of us, and heavy smoke conditions. It was air quality warnings and don't work outside. And We're like, we're kind of used to this. So we'd mask up in our N95 mask. You'll note on that one, they have the exhalation valves. I would highly recommend that if you're buying masks for your workers or your volunteers doing these types of activities, that you spend the extra money and get the ones with the exhalation valve. Much better for any kind of physical exertion work. And there is uh, OSHA has the airborne silica standards, and that changed, I want to say about 6 or 7 years ago now, to lower the concentration that respiratory protection needs to be required. This is mainly for people operating like drilling concrete inside of a building. Because it's a lot harder to deal with the dust. However, we still can meet those levels outdoors. If you're not if you're standing right in the dust cloud that's coming off of, the rock drill or something. So most of this can be done through just kind of avoiding the areas where the dust is concentrated. But you do want to just kind of be familiar with that if you do those kind of operations. And this is that same project. So a clear day, we wouldn't, put the masks on, dealing with a lot of dust, and I'd come home looking like this. And then on a smoky day on the right, wearing a mask, it's a pretty significant difference, and pretty entertaining when you come home. And my wife would ask me if I stopped by the store on my way home, and I said, "Yeah, why?" So first aid. So training, if you're dealing with an agency that has requirements for volunteer crew leaders, generally the minimum is CPR and a 4-hour first aid class. That's pretty minimal. So I would highly recommend, if possible, to encourage people to get like wilderness first responder or higher level of training. But that's kind of the minimum of being able to recognize a problem, maybe perform some bleeding control or comfort and care, and knowing when to call 911. That's more or less all you're going to get out of that. But having some supplies on hand can reduce the likelihood of an injury getting worse, or um, uh, you know, a minor incident turning into something major. The one I recommend is Adventure Medical Kits. Their .7 is what they call it, is just about the right size for trail work that I've found in my experience. And I add a few things to it that I find useful. Probably the most used items in the first aid kit that I've found are eye wash and Benadryl or diphenhydramine. So the kits come with the Benadryl, and then I add little uh, containers of eye wash, single-use containers of eye wash that can be used to clean wounds or rinse out debris in the eyes. And then having some kind of bleeding control. I keep this with my saw kit, so like anytime my saw goes out, I know that these are present. uh, Having a tourniquet can make the difference in a laceration being controllable and can deal with it, to get the person out versus a potentially major life-threatening incident. And then there's also several products out there that will help stop bleeding. The Quick Clot being one of them. I like it because it's very compact, and it works reasonably well. So and on the tourniquets, the CAT, it's Combat Application Tourniquet, is my preferred one. There are many out there. These are a little bit more expensive, and by that I mean about $25. Uh, there are cheaper ones out there, but if you need it, that's not the time to find out that one of the straps is broken or not sewn correctly, or the plastic windlass is broken or something like that. So to me, that's worth it. So having stuff like that kind of augmented in your first aid kit can be very helpful. So tool safety. So using the right tool in the right way for the right job is what I preach often, because just about every time that we've found broken tools at the end of a volunteer day, it's because it was used incorrectly. There's some good documents out there. I included one in the resource folder, and you may have heard of CUS. So carrying tools, using tools, storing tools, and then general safety with tools. It's a good little acronym to kind of help remember some of the things uh, that we should and shouldn't do with tools out on the trail site to minimize risk to ourselves and other trail users that might be coming by. That's something that I know I've said many times of like, hey, make sure those tools get, kept off the trail. Because if, they just get kind of scattered on the trail as people are using them and the trail's open to the public because you're doing maintenance and someone comes along, now you've introduced a hazard. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But, if they trip on that tool, that's kind of your fault versus their fault. So you want to reduce the likelihood of something like that occurring. So keep an eye on them, inspect them for damages, and if you start to see damage occurring, remove them from the job site. One of the things that I often see is fiberglass handles starting to separate, and it's kind of difficult to notice. Sometimes you have to look closely between the handle and the tool and notice that the bonding agent is starting to disintegrate and the tool is separating. And they're not really repairable like a wood handle is. So I'm not a huge fan of the fiberglass handles. The only tool I like them on is the hammers. And try to put a protector on there to help limit the damage from like striking a rock short of the head. But most everything else, wood handles seems to be the way to go, and they're a little easier to maintain. But yeah, if you find anything that looks broken or about to break, it's a good idea to stop using it. So if we're using power tools, that kind of can increase some of the risks involved. It's really important to follow the directions. The manufacturers tend to put a lot of money into making sure that their directions have all sorts of warning labels and uh, recommendations in there. And very few people tend to read those because it kind of does end up being some boilerplate and seems like really obvious, but sometimes tucked away in there is something that's pretty important. So I would recommend reading the directions. Keep your work area clear from other people, from debris, making sure that you have a good, stable stance and a good grip on the tool. I included a couple that have taken out a few arms in the past. The Cobra Combi, formerly known as the Punjar, gas-powered jackhammer and rock drill. It's a challenging tool to operate, and it has a lot of hazards, and it doesn't have quite the grip that more modern electric roto hammers have. So when that drill locks up and it rotates the tool, if your arm is in there, it has broken a few arms. The more modern electric drills that you see there in the lower right, definitely a little bit safer, but making sure that you have a good grip on that tool, because if the bit does jam up, it wants to rotate the tool very quickly. Um, and then cordless tools. So they're a game changer for a lot of the things that we do in trail work. However, there are some potential risks with using them, and specifically the batteries. It's not a huge issue with brand name tools and brand name batteries, but it can happen. And most of the time when it does happen, it's one of three factors involved. Is it's overheated, so in our environment, that can be like being left out in the sun. They get wet, which can happen in our type of work environments. Or there is a like a knockoff or counterfeit battery being used with a different, branded tool. So if you can kind of keep the batteries in the shade, or we often will bring a piece of cardboard or something and just kind of lay it down over a battery charger if we're charging in the field off a generator. to kind of keep the sun off of it and keep the temperatures down. If you can keep them dry, when it starts raining, those are one of the first tools that I make sure gets under a tarp. And then make sure it's the brand name stuff. There's not only the kind of the knockoff batteries that you might look at and be like, hey, that's a lot cheaper, but there's also counterfeits out there that may look like a brand name battery, but they're actually a counterfeit with a lot less quality involved. So avoiding those will very much reduce the risk of an incident with a cordless tool battery, but it can occasionally happen. And as they become more prevalent, there's also an uptick in battery fires. Hazard trees. So we had back in 2015 or 16, the organizations that I was involved with in the Lake Tahoe area, we had within a year, we had both a volunteer get hit by a hazard tree as well as a seasonal firefighter for the Forest Service that was hit and killed by a hazard tree. So there was quite a bit of training and discussions about that with trail work operations. And it's something that I have noticed doesn't seem to happen as much in some other jurisdictions. And so I believe that it's because we've had some incidents and the agencies involved were very reactive in providing training and trying to make sure that we can reduce the risks of an injury occurring from that out on the trail or out on the fire line. So a hazard tree is can be any dead, dying, storm damaged, insect damaged type tree that may look like it's going to fall or it may not. But it's rotted out on the inside and there's very little holding it up. And they can present a hazard really anywhere that you have trees. So one of the documents that I included in the folder is called Tree Strikes and You're Out. And you see what they did there? And it's a pretty good little training document. It's all text. There's not a lot of pictures and stuff in there, but very good information. And the key points on that is like you minimize your time and you maximize your distance. So if you see a tree that looks like it may not be super stable, minimize the time underneath it and or stay away from it. So it's not a place to sit down and have lunch. When we look at job sites, something like this where you see a bridge, that's a concentrated work site. And this was somewhat unfortunate in that the volunteer group that was putting this bridge in didn't have any qualified sawyers to drop a tree this size. And so they were like, well, we don't have anyone, so we're just going to build the bridge. And it was very lucky that nothing happened. I came along working on the trail nearby and I saw this. I'm like, wow, like you guys were really lucky. I'll take that tree out for you. And it was not a very easy tree to remove because of how rotten it was. And we were able to tie it off and pull it kind of opposite the lean and at least keep it from hitting the bridge. But that being over a concentrated location, concentrated work site where people are spending a lot of time, that's a much higher hazard than just if it was leaning over a section of trail that people would be spending fairly limited time in any particular location. Here's some of the documents that the Forest Service has produced. All of these are in the resource folder. Fantastic information if you're like, hey, there's nothing like this in my area, and you want to do some research on it. This is the incident report or the learning document on the trail worker, the volunteer trail worker that was injured by a falling tree. So kind of a similar situation, but also not really in that they didn't have a qualified sawyer to cut down the tree. So they were going to remove it with a grip hoist. Now, they had not yet started to do this. They were simply getting the rigging out to prepare to throw a strap around it and grip hoist it over from a distance. when the tree fell. So they hadn't even touched the tree yet, and it just randomly happened to fall as one of the volunteers was next to it. And it glanced off his hard hat, gave him some pretty good injuries, but he was able to recover from that. And then here's one that occurred with us last summer. So I had machine built this section of trail the day before. We walked out at 5 o'clock and that tree was not there. And the next morning when we came in, it was there. I was like, wow, we were pretty lucky that my crew wasn't, as they were working down this way, doing handwork, that they weren't right there when it decided to fall. And I had evaluated these trees as I was all throughout this project and did not think that I was like, yeah, there's some issues there, but they didn't appear to be critical. My judge is kind of like, hey, if it looks like it's going to fall in the next 5 years and come across the trail, I'll usually take it out. But I was like, yeah, it didn't look that bad. And once I looked at the stump after it fell, I realized that, the outside looked okay, but the inside was just completely rotten and gone. So I was like, well, that was kind of a close call. So I took out all three of those because we also are judging, and kind of doing an assessment on the potential uh, for my employee safety or crew safety, and falling in the next few years where it becomes a trail hazard versus any potential nesting birds, if that's a wildlife tree. So we kind of have to assess each one before it's dropped. But kind of after this, I was like, okay, that's not worth the risk. All of them are going to come out there. So fire safety. So ways that you can start a fire on a trail project. There are many. Fortunately, it doesn't happen all that often. But anytime that you have moving metal against rock, there is a potential for a spark. So if you've ever done trail work into the evening, where it starts to get dark, you'll notice that it's not uncommon to see sparks coming off of a hand tool being swung into the dirt. When it clips a rock, you'll see some sparks come off. A pedal strike off of your bicycle, it's not common, but I'm aware of two incidents. One, that was the likely cause of a wildland fire. And then the second, it was actually witnessed and observed occurring and the incipient fire starting, and that was listed as the cause. Uh, so your equipment blade, if you're using equipment, or the bucket on an excavator, they don't move as fast as a tool being swung, but there's a lot of force behind them, so it's still possible, but I would consider that pretty unlikely. More likely is going to be like your fueling operations with equipment. Now you have flammable liquids out on the job site, and potential for a hydraulic leak. Again, very rare, but the next slide I'll show a video of what happens when hydraulic fluid under pressure leaks and aerosolizes. So also with equipment, you have the potential for overheating or some kind of electrical issue. An occurrence that has caused fires is debris buildup in the belly pan. So cleaning that out, it's somewhat regularly will help reduce the risk of that. And then doing any kind of hot work. And within your jurisdictions, there may be requirements from the local fire department or fire district for getting what's referred to as a hot work permit for doing operations like grinding, cutting, welding, blasting, where there's potential for those operations to start a fire. So when you're doing that out in the field, especially around dry grass, you have to take quite a bit of precautions to avoid a fire starting from those. So here's a little video of what happens when hydraulic fluid aerosolizes and finds an ignition source. So you start to see maybe some fluid is leaking out, getting in contact with something hot. There goes the leak, and there's the ignition. Now, fortunately, when you have a flash fire like this, Sometimes it will just flash and then not continue to burn. I don't know what the end result of this garbage truck was, whether it actually fully caught fire or not, but that flash fire can still cause injury or obviously ignite, um, either vegetation or the piece of equipment. So some of the things that we can do to reduce the risk of starting a fire from a trail project is have easy access to a fire extinguisher. So, having it on a quick release bracket, buying fire extinguishers that are like actual commercial use and not, the residential special, can make a difference. Plan work around fire weather conditions. So, we run into those pretty often up here in the Sierra. So oftentimes we'll be working in the morning and we cut out at 1 o'clock or whenever the red flag warning goes into effect. In some areas of the like Pacific Northwest, that's called the industrial fire precaution level. Basically, if you're working out in an area that is covered by that, you have to call the phone number to find out what it is for that day. Um, if you're doing some kind of hot work where you're like, hey, we're just kind of like maybe grinding these bolts off of a signpost or something like that. If you bring in water, you can pre-wet the area surrounding your work area, and then hold up like a welding blanket or something as a screen for the sparks. And we've been able to really contain, sparks when we're like, hey, we just got to do this one little operation. And so we'll kind of, contain the area so that we don't risk starting a fire from it. And then, maybe just choose better methods. In my professional career, we've responded to fires where, somebody was using a grinder for something that they could have used a Sawzall for, much less risk of sparks coming from a Sawzall. And then, the one of the for having fire water on site, one of the things that we use and like is it's called a backpack pump or a back pump. And you'll find it just about on every brush fire engine. They're not super expensive, uh, and it's basically a manually operated pump uh, at the end of that little hose with 5 gallons in a soft backpack. So they're pretty easy to just kind of keep with you and have it ready to go. There's larger tanks, plastic tanks, with little gasoline powered pumps that you could mount in like a power wheelbarrow or the back of a UTV for a little extra fire water. So one of the things that we get in the fire service is we get a lot of like accident reports as learning documents. They're usually non-punitive and more or less, hey, this happened and we want to share it so that it's less likely to happen to others. And so one of the things that has been out there in the last few years is a fuel geyser. And if you're not familiar with a fuel geyser, it's when you're using gasoline powered tools, or even the fuel cans that store the gasoline, and you have a pressure increase, usually due to heat, within that tank, and you open the fill cap, and it comes out under pressure and aerosolizes. And there's a little video here of it happening to this gentleman where it fortunately did not ignite, but this demonstrates a fuel geyser. So the saw wasn't starting. I'm presuming he was going to go check the fuel level, and obviously that wasn't the issue, but it was under pressure and it came out. And so if that made contact with an ignition source and ignited, there's usually burn injuries associated with that. And it doesn't always have to be the tools. You'll see in this lower video from an aluminum fuel can. This may be
Geysering
what you
occurs when
use, is
fuel
what I
vapor
use.
pressure builds in the fuel tank.
I'll play that one
Geysering
again. It's
occurs
pretty
when
quick.
fuel vapor pressure builds in the fuel tank.
So presumably that was
Geysering
left
occurs.
out in the sun, built up pressure, and the O-ring on the cap failed in one spot, and the fuel came out under pressure and aerosolized. So, store your fuel cans in the shade, you reduce your risk. So this 6 minutes for safety document talks about fuel geysers and how to reduce the threat from them. And there's also references in that to some burn injuries that occurred with wildland firefighters. And one of the links that I put in the resource folder is a steel safety video on reducing the fuel geyser risks to wildland firefighters. And it's a pretty good video. That's the lower video here is a clip from that video. Oops. That's not advancing.
Just try clicking on your PowerPoint and then right click.
Uh-oh, the spinning wheel of death. Oh, my apologies for that. Just bear with me a second, folks. We'll hope that this restarts. Okay. So notification signage. This is pretty important because you are potentially creating a um, external hazard out on along the trail while you're doing work. And it's a really good idea to post some type of signage so that trail users are aware, particularly if it's on a mountain bike trail and it's a a downhill or can be used as a downhill trail. You want to make sure that there's signage with enough lead time for people to slow down or stop before they get to your work site where you may have the trail blocked or tools on the trail, people working on the trail. And if you're doing some kind of, project involves closing the trail or working on the trail, it's nice to put some kind of notification signage down at the trailhead that says, hey, on this date at this time, this section of trail is being worked on. You might want to use other trails in the area or find other routes. So I find these Coroplast, so that's the kind of plastic cardboard, and we have these made by a local sign shop to the MUTCD standards, sign standards. So they look kind of just like a road construction sign, but for trail construction. So I have them for trail closed ahead, trail construction ahead. And then they're not very expensive, but the even cheaper option is just colored paper and laminating it. So, these end up costing me maybe 25 cents and I can kind of say what I want on them. So, here's an example of like a sign that we put at the trailhead of like, hey, we're going to be doing some closures because we have to get equipment in and out. Um, and then, if you're doing a trail that might have features on it, there's a lot of information out there of like, hey, the risk management of signage on a trail, but sometimes that signage takes time and it's really hard to like close a trail like that. People are usually pretty antsy to get out there and try it out. They're not going to wait for the signage to appear. So making some temporary signage and getting it up there, while it's still under your purview as a work site, can be pretty important. And being able to warn people that like, hey, this trail has some features on it. Or when we've done reroutes, I've put signs up that very simple signs that just say new trail ahead, change in the trail ahead, use caution. Just so that there's some kind of notification that there's something different from what they normally may have seen along that trail in the past. User safety, so understanding the difference between an introduced hazard and a naturally occurring hazard. You're probably not going to end up in a lawsuit over a naturally occurring hazard, but if you do an action that leads to somebody's injury, there's potential for a lawsuit or a claim on that. So things that are introduced hazard would be like leaving your tools on the trail, leaving a borrow pit open. So you dig a hole to get some good dirt and you don't fill it back up and someone comes along and falls in it. The items placed in the fall zone. So like if you're putting, decorative rocks along a trail or signposts or, um, uh, items that are where somebody might leave the trail, like on the outside of a exit of a turn or something where they have limited visibility, like that would be a bad idea. Like that's there, you're increasing the likelihood that someone could get hurt. And then like rebar. So if you're using rebar either in the trail, which I'm not a fan of, like you see here, because it has a tendency to either the boards sink down or the rebar works its way back up, and you end up with like a pretty major impalement hazard left on your trail. So if you're using it in your construction for like stakes or string lines or something like that, making sure that you get the caps on there. That's it's an OSHA requirement, and it's a pretty easy way to reduce the risk of someone getting injured, either a trail user or one of your crew. Site security. So out in the backcountry, it's pretty rare. It's occasionally happened. Most of my financial impacts in backcountry sites have been from animals. But my preferred method is camouflage. So you can kind of barely see in this photo. I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but kind of right in the center of the photo is the excavator. Um, and I believe tucked right behind it is the power wheelbarrow under a camouflage tarp. So I put up trail cameras. Sometimes we'll lock stuff together if it's easily removable with a cable and a padlock. And we hide our tool caches, wrap them in a weatherproof tarp and hide them, away from the work site a little bit. And then the advantage of the trail cameras is sometimes you get, pretty good pictures of little friends visiting the work site and trying out the trail dozer or trying out the excavator, trying to show their cub how to use the excavator. Um, or kind of giving you the weird side eye, what's going on kind of look. But that's when a bear decided to rip open the tarp and try to eat the foam seat. So that was probably the most expensive animal visit that I had. In the front country, it's a little bit more of a problem from the human, the two-legged animals. So you want to do some kind of deterrent to keep the honest people honest, and this might be renting some temporary fencing. It's very cost effective. Storing your equipment or tools, in some kind of cargo container or job box, locking things up, or renting a surveillance trailer. You see these pretty commonly on like commercial construction projects nowadays. I looked into renting one for a trailhead project once, and it was like $2,500 for the month. And I'm like, well, it's not that big of a project for that, but that for a bigger project that I might have been there longer, that might have been worthwhile. So operating vehicles, so you may be using off-highway vehicles within your projects. So some kind of safety training course is pretty important on those. It could just be on-the-job training, like a hands-on orientation of how to operate it and what to do and what not to do. Obviously, PPE is recommended, like a helmet. And there are some online courses. There's some okay ones that are free, and then there's some decent ones that you have to pay a small fee for to get a certificate. That may be a solution for a small business or a small organization for providing some training for their folks. And then driving or operating regular vehicles on the street. So this is probably the highest risk activity that you have, that your people may do as a business or a agency or organization. I caught something that the average workplace vehicle accident costs the employer $17,000. And like that. I mean, that would be a big impact for my business, or a very noticeable impact. So ways that you can reduce that risk is providing defensive driver training to your employees, or requiring a CDL training program that they go through and get a higher class of license. Or you could just set up some cones in a parking lot and just work on some spatial awareness, on how to back a trailer, or just kind of, knowing the size of their vehicle and how to react and go around corners and back it into a alley dock and things like that. I included a link here for an online defensive driver training that it's actually recommended in our state, recognized for employees. And we have used this also in the fire department, that organization, for online trainings. So online trainings aren't great, but I will say this one's not horrible. And certainly for a small business, being able to spend, $50 or so to get a training program for an employee is pretty reasonable. And kind of one of the last things we're going to talk about is operating equipment. So, keep people that aren't involved in the operation away. Be aware of your blind spots. Start with more stable equipment and work your way up to equipment that's harder to operate. Wear PPE. I didn't used to tell my folks to wear a hard hat inside a cab, but now I do, and it's based on experience. Wearing the seatbelt is super important. And then understanding your center of gravity. I think just about every rollover incident, really comes down to, a center of gravity issue. On bad terrain, the bucket's too high, or the boom is too high. Uh, the tracks are in instead of out. All these things that we kind of do on a routine basis in the trail world can lead to a rollover accident. And here's an example right here, and I think that this really stresses on the need to wear the seatbelt. And then in the fire service, like I talked about, the incident reports, so it's often called a green sheet. There's a few that I've included in the resource drive on dozer fatalities on fires. This one was, they were trying to widen an OHV trail. This is very similar to the type of work that we do. The track went off the edge, and the dozer started to roll, and it ended up as a fatality. This one, also a rollover. The operator wasn't wearing a helmet. Now they're required for CAL FIRE. And his head hit a part of attachment point within the roll cage. And it caused a significant skull depression, and that was listed as the cause of death. And then here's one that I was like, wow, that's pretty similar to some I've seen, out in the trail world, just a kind of a slipping off at an intersection from one trail to the lower. So it was more of a tip over than a rollover. The operator didn't have his lap belt on and was ejected and was killed. So we learn from a lot of these so that we don't repeat them and others don't repeat them. Personally, I tipped over my excavator once. I remember my hard hat hitting the roll cage. And it turned out to be kind of a non-incident. We had it back up in an hour. But if I had have ended up with a head injury from that, that would have significantly impacted that project and probably my life. Wearing head protection and using the restraints provided is really critical. And then lastly is just environmental protection. So we don't necessarily want to be responsible for some kind of environmental impact, a spill, a discharge of sediment into a waterway. So having a spill kit on site, utilizing what we call BMPs, best management practices, are pretty critical and required under a lot of different projects to minimize that risk. So that's pretty much all I have. There's a QR code to the resource folder that you're welcome to snap a photo of. It'll be in the presentation that's shared. And I think I didn't actually look in the chat to see if that link was also shared there, but you're welcome to use any of those documents in there.
I'm here. Sorry, my cat knocked down my webcam, I just realized. Okay. Thank you so much, Kevin. We have a lot of great questions, and I just want to remind people, I'm going to keep this QR code up here for just a minute while I ask the first question, and just remind everyone that they can still submit questions. We have a few minutes left. I'll ask as many questions as I can before the end time. But I wanted to thank Kevin so much. And all the resources, like the documents and stuff, again, that he did mention during the presentation, we linked to a few times via the chat box. And those are all on the webinar's webpage that you can access at any time. If you just search it on the AmericanTrails.org website. So I did want to ask you, Kevin, one attendee, Stephanie, is asking, thank you so much. You're an outstanding speaker, with impressive qualifications, and wondering if you have a website for your projects.
I bought a website about 4 or 5 years ago, and I still haven't put anything on it. It goes to like the standard whatever GoDaddy screen. Um, but I've been meaning to, because I do want to kind of document my projects a little bit better. But we don't advertise much, and are usually booked out quite a bit. So at some point, yes, I will get a website up. And I was able to, I pulled up the thing, so I have some, I see the questions here, Candace, so I'll try to hit a couple of these real
Sure.
quickly.
Sounds good.
So Jeff asked about the respirators. So if you're mentioning the reinforced paper respirators, I do not recommend those. Get the N95s, and the key part is having the little metal clip right here so it seals around your nose. You can bend that clip to create a seal. It's off the top of my head, I'm going to call it the 3M. It's like the 2910 model. I'll see if I can include a link. I can add a link to that shared drive. So if you check that drive tomorrow, I'll have something in there on which model that is. But it works really good when you're actually working and sweating, and you don't want your goggles fogging up or your glasses fogging up. The basic medical kit, I'll put that in there too. It's the Adventure Medical Kit's .7 for Katie's question. Mountain bikers going around trail closed signs. So it's not just mountain bikers. Boy, we've gone out of our way when we've had to close a trail because there was no other option, and multiple signage, trailhead, 1,000 yards or 100 yards out, at the site, and people just walk right around them or come right around them. If you really need an absolute hard closure, you've got to staff it with a person. Um, a warning before watching a video. Sorry about that. There's lots of them out there on YouTube. I just found one. Slides will be cat herding. I think that's all the questions. Oh, chainsaw certification course. So if it's an option for you, try to get one from the U.S. Forest Service. It is outside of that, it is a little difficult to find. But yeah, if you can get one from your local ranger district, ask if they have an instructor and if they put on a course with any kind of regularity. Chainsaw exhaust. I have not. I suppose it's possible. I would think it's more likely if it's like maybe you set it down and next to some grass and the grass touches the muffler versus the exhaust. But I wouldn't say it's impossible. So I think that's all of them, and we're probably just oh no, wait, we have like 1 minute left.
Great. And I did see, I just want to note, Stephanie, oops, sorry, hold on. Okay, I just want to note, Stephanie, you did see Sarah Trail Works on our website. Yes, he is on our website, but there's no link to his website still with projects. It's just very generic information. So
Yeah, I think pretty much all it says is Sierra Trail Works, Reno, Nevada.
right.
Oh, I see carrying tools along the trail. So I will just say that there is a document that I put in the shared resource folder from Cody, the Colorado Outdoor Training Institute, I believe, that has all sorts of information, including how to carry recommended ways of carrying tools to reduce risk.
Right. Awesome. And I know a lot of more people are commenting now, but I'm going to go ahead and just thank you again, Kevin, so much. And again, if anyone does have questions for Kevin, you're more than welcome to contact him and follow up with him after the webinar. I will be sharing his email that's shown on this slide right now. I will be sharing it in my follow-up email that includes all of the resources, not all of them, as many as I could fit on the slide, but they are all available on the webinar's webpage at the link at the very top of this slide that you see here. And so I also, again, want to thank our attendees. Oops, sorry. I first want to thank, along with the Professional TrailBuilders Association for being a partner on this webinar. I want to thank them along with the additional webinar partners that include Visit Long Beach Peninsula, as well as the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, and the USDA Forest Service. And if you are enjoying these webinars, please consider donating as little as $5 by texting "I'm for Trails" to 44321. Your donation or it will be a monthly drawing for those. I will do a monthly drawing for those that donate today to win our Trail Boss mug, coaster, Happy Trails coaster, and stickers. And if you are a sustaining monthly donor, if you come in as at that level, we will automatically send you a mug as a thank you. Lastly, I just hope you'll join us for our next webinar coming up in our Advancing Trails webinar series. And a reminder to subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/American Trails, where you can watch the live webinar as well as view all of the recordings from all of our webinars. Thank you again, Kevin, and thank you for everyone for attending. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and happy